turn up for an event in Pakistan. So exactly 3 years ago, a group of Marxists was purged from the largest socialist parties in Pakistan for being in opposition to the Taliban on the one hand and imperialism and its client Pakistan Army on the other. I was somewhat fortunately a part of that minority group that was sidelined. In the course of the next 10 minutes, I will explain why this happened and how this single event led to the establishment of the Awami Workers' Party, which is now the largest Marxist party in Pakistan with over 1 million supporters. Few questions aroused such an intense and sharp political debate in Pakistan as the question of drone strikes and military intervention in Pakistan's sovereign territories. Obviously, this question has more than academic value, not only because it has affected and continues to affect the lives of millions of people in South Asia, but also because a final resolution to this contradiction will critically shape the future of that region. Now Bangladesh in 1971 and the systematic genocide of Balochis and Pashtuns in 1948, 1973, 1981, 1983, 1993, and from 2007 to the present. Second, the fact that the idiom of a monolithic Islamic identity was used to seemingly unite these widely divergent national and class identities. Thus, the peaceful and democratic aspirations of the oppressed classes and nationalities during the past 6 decades of Pakistan's existence have been equated with anti-Islamism, and since the state professes to have a religion, i.e. Islam, it can use this ideological and legal instrument to crush popular aspirations. Third, it is easy to forget in the aftermath of the last decade that historically political Islam has been serving the interests of imperialism very successfully in the Muslim world in general and Pakistan in particular. Throughout the 1970s, 80s and early 90s, imperialist interests in Afghanistan and Pakistan, what the Obama administration has come to describe as AFPA, played themselves out through an alliance of imperialism and Islamic fundamentalism. The word imperialism has, of course, gone somewhat out of fashion since the end of the Cold War, with the exception of those on the left of the political spectrum and certain right-wing academics in the US that harbor no pretense about the role that Washington plays in global affairs. In Pakistan, the word has become almost exclusively associated with the religious right, especially since 9/11. What is particularly unfortunate about this particular confluence of events is the fact that progressives in Pakistan have quite willingly ceded this ground to the right wing, not only politically, but also intellectually. There is now no consensus position of progressives vis-a-vis the US and its purported jihadi nemesis. Liberals insist that it is the reactionaries that must be resisted at all costs, and laud America's commitment to doing so. They argue that it is not Islamic fundamentalism but Islam itself that impedes social harmony. Somewhat surprisingly, these liberals support an aggressive war that has led to the death of hundreds of thousands of innocent children and 3.5 million people without homes, all in the name of creating social harmony. There is very little evidence that Afghanistan and Pakistan are closer to stability now than when the war started in 2001. In effect, the Americans have vacillated as much as the Pakistanis, and there is more than a hint of desperation about the Obama administration's attempt to make it appear as if the fundamental fault for the failing war lies in Islamabad. As some commentators have noted, the spread of war into Pakistan bears more than a passing resemblance to the bombing of Cambodia in 1969 in the wake of years of futility in Vietnam. Then, the US-backed Nol regime was backed by the hyper-elite in Phnom Penh and other major urban centers on account of the communist threat, which was justification enough for the massacre of civilians. On this occasion, Pakistan's liberal elite has fully backed a massive military operation under the guise that the Taliban represent a grave threat to humanity. In short, the elite has completely bought into the media hype and acquiesced to the absurdity of displacing 3 million people in the name of fighting a few thousand insurgents. This political stand is particularly stunning in light of the openly acknowledged fact that the Pakistan Army remains unwilling to completely sever ties with religious militants who can be classified as good Taliban in their books, in contrast to the bad Taliban in Swat. In effect, the crimes of imperialism and its client Pakistan Army are being forgiven in the name of confronting the enemies of civilization. As if the position of these Pakistani liberals were not irritating enough, the positions taken by many on the left were equally dismal. Some on the left have described the Taliban as the principal contradiction of our times. As a result, they argued that the military operation in Fatah and the Pashtun belt ought to be wholeheartedly supported. The refugees were described as internally displaced people, a typical example of the apolitical nature of their discourse. They have been driven from their homes by the nexus of terror, that is the empire, the Pakistan army, and the Taliban. They want only to return to a genuine peace. But the US imperial triangle, namely state-financed military production, media propaganda, and real or imagined economic employment effects, ensures that the war continues with no end in sight. Pakistan's Pashtuns are being forced into a corner just like their Afghan kin due to decades of uninterrupted and cynical warfare. The Afghan Taliban came into power and obtained the de facto acceptance of the Afghan population precisely because people were tired of war and wanted peace, however it was framed, and at any cost. The displacement of more than 3 million Pakistani Pashtuns will provide another golden opportunity for the Taliban within Pakistan to genuinely deepen their presence within society. An inability to understand this seemingly obvious conclusion led to a split within the leftist parties in Pakistan. In 2009, those who stood against the military operation and drone strikes against the people of Pakistan were in a minority in all the socialist parties. Those who said that we cannot reduce the debate to supporting either the Taliban or imperialism were deemed as oscillationists, whatever that term means, and were systematically purged from these parties. At the time, I was a Central Committee member of one of those parties and was a part of that minority group that was sidelined and purged. As is often the case, however, this gave us an opportunity to revisit this debate with an open mind and to engage in a dialogue with workers, peasants, and student unions across Pakistan. When the intelligentsia has isolated you, Lenin said, it is the broadest sections of the masses that become your greatest allies. We initiated a cross-country dialogue on the question and concluded that those who stood in support of drone strikes and military intervention in Fatah are effectively saying that anti-imperialism, like other planks of a leftist program, is now nothing less than an anachronism. In fact, it is intellectually dishonest to deny that imperial projects continue to shape our world in multidimensional ways. Notwithstanding what we would like to believe, these projects, as has been the case throughout history, will never benefit humanity at large because imperialisms, old and new, at best seek a kind of progress which inevitably leaves the mass of humanity to pick up the pieces along with the ecosystem that sustains us. Indeed, I want to reiterate that the absence of a coherent and principled political position amongst those who consider themselves as progressives in today's Pakistan is explained in large part by a very superficial understanding of imperialism and the imperatives motivating the various imperialist forces that have set out their stall in the present conjuncture. During the course of the next 2 years, i.e. from 2010 to 12, this small band of purged, isolated Marxists concluded that in the final analysis, imperialist aggression was fueling the wave of Islamization in Pakistan. And since no genuinely progressive forces were able to capture these popular resentments, the de facto result was that right-wing forces were gaining in popularity. It was therefore necessary to downplay our orthodox pedantic differences, i.e. the differences between the Stalinists, Maoists, Trotskyists, and other types of ists within the tradition, and concentrate on building a genuinely grassroots progressive political movement. The painstaking work of a new brand of radical students led finally to the merger of these breakaway factions to form what is now called the Awami Workers' Party, which now has over 1 million members across Pakistan, and it's composed of the Union of Landless Peasants in Punjab, the National Students Federation, and the conglomeration of labor unionists in Pakistan. The party is all set to contest the next general elections in May and is prepared to take on an active battle not only against imperialism and its client, the Pakistan Army, but also against the Taliban and other extremists who justify murder in the name of religion. Notwithstanding the obsession of the world's news media with the supposedly existential threat posed to Pakistan by the religious right, the left's arguably biggest immediate challenge will be to bridge the growing ethnic divide in the country. The left has had to contend with the regionalization of politics across Asia and much of the world, so the challenge facing Pakistani leftists is not necessarily unique. Nevertheless, given the distinct rise of parochial trends in recent times, projecting a sensitive and nuanced politics of class that foregrounds Pakistan's multinational character is, in our contemporary climate, a truly revolutionary task. Imperialism remains a major impediment to the long-term democratization of the state in our society. Since 2003, the Pakistan Army has used the war on terror as a pretext for rounding up secular and progressive nationalist and Marxist leaders in Balochistan and Gilgit. In the wake of new legislations, such as the establishment of anti-terrorist courts, it has become extremely easy for the state to round up progressive Marxist and nationalist leaders under the guise of fighting terrorism. In 2011, the leader of the Union of Landless Peasants...
Just need you to look up a little bit for the video, that's all. Thank you.
Or the gentleman in the front to slouch down.
In 2011, the leader of the Union of...
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
So in 2011, the leader of the Union of Landless Peasants in Punjab was arrested under the pretext of fighting Islamic terrorism. He was released 6 months later after the prosecution finally realized that the guy was a Christian and hence could not possibly be associated with Islamic terrorism to begin with. Despite this embarrassing conclusion, by this time he had been brutally tortured and all 5 of his fingers were brutally mutilated. Political Islamists, including the Taliban within Afghanistan and Pakistan, do not offer a meaningful alternative to capitalist imperialism. They romanticize the past and offer those who will die in their cause the promise of eternal salvation. In the particular case of Pakistan, they remain the beneficiaries of the state's ideological compulsions, even if many contradictions have emerged in the historical relationship between jihadis and the state as this latest wave of imperialist war has progressed. Their project of permanent war against what they term the infidels is in fact the mirror image of the clash of civilizations logic. While I agree that there is no question of the left allying with political Islamists, I do believe that it is important for the left to learn from the past and avoid alienating itself from the wider public in Muslim societies by depicting itself as anti-religious. Throughout the Cold War and even afterwards, the secular left was victimized by the state and the right-wing forces because it could be equated to a movement of atheists. Needless to say, massive propaganda campaigns played their part, but there were also inopportune mistakes made by the left in the sense of a dismissive attitude towards religion that indeed has harmed their cause. I believe that even in Pakistan, which is less conducive to secular political traditions simply because of its peculiar genesis, political Islamists' monopoly over the politics of anti-imperialism will not last. The imperial triangle and the Islamists feed off each other, as Vikas has brilliantly pointed out, and it will therefore be some time before the secular left again becomes a meaningful force in Pakistan and other Muslim countries. It must never be forgotten that before the Islamists were foisted upon Muslim societies, it was indeed the secular progressive left that represented the aspirations of the popular classes. And ultimately, it is only the secular left that can take the popular anti-imperialist project to its logical conclusion, socialism and nothing less. Thank you.